Welcome to the Exchange Podcast, a podcast focused on speaking to interesting and inspiring people so that we can learn and grow through the exchange of ideas. My name is Martin Prinsley, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Neels Nel. Neels is a partner at PwC Middle East, where he leads the firm's asset lifecycle management and valuation practice. Over nearly 3 decades, he has advised governments and organizations across 3 continents and more than 27 countries on strategy, transformation, and the management of major projects and asset-intensive projects as well. Neels, welcome to the Exchange Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Martin. It's lovely to be here, and I'm looking forward to exchanging ideas and sharing some painful lessons that I've learned over the years, and some happy lessons that I've learned over the years as well.
Okay, so to begin, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about what you do today at PwC Middle East?
Okay, sure. I was born in rural South Africa, so I grew up in the rural part of South Africa, Afrikaans farming communities where I was born, and grew up. Very happy, fond memories of my time, but also South Africa. Of course, at that time, we were a bit oblivious to what was going on, and as I went to university, that's really when the changes started happening in South Africa, and that's when I think my generation, we were the first people that voted. So the first that we were allowed to vote in South Africa was in the 1992 referendum to decide whether the government should continue with allowing and lifting the ban on organizations like the ANC. So I was in that generation that came into a new South Africa, and to be honest, had some say in allowing the government to move that way. So it was exciting and sometimes stressful times over the next 5 or 6 years as South Africa moved into the democracy that it is now, and a fully a fully integrated society, or not as integrated as it can be, I suppose. So I went to university in Johannesburg. I went to what is now called University of Johannesburg, but it was then called Rand Afrikaans University. That was my university. I studied there, but I come from a small town. It was the first time in my life that I actually went to a city when I went to university. And after university, I started working for PricewaterhouseCoopers at that stage. It was before the merger. Later on in 1999, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Coopers and Lybrand merged and formed PricewaterhouseCoopers at that time. But I started working for Pricewaterhouse, which was the more English part of the firms, and which had its own challenges for an Afrikaans guy who studied in Afrikaans to start working in English in Johannesburg. I started there. I started my life so I'm a chartered accountant by qualification. So I qualified as a chartered accountant. I started working in the audit practice of PwC, but it wasn't really something that I thought I would want to do for a longer term. I always want to do something else. And as I completed my training contract and I was qualified as a chartered accountant, an opportunity came for a project in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. It was led by PwC UK, and they were looking to staff it from other parts of the world, especially cheaper parts of the world, and South Africa was one of them. And I put myself forward to go on the project to Saudi Arabia. Never been to the Middle East. No idea what it was really about, but I just wanted an adventure and I wanted to get out, and I joined a 2-year project in Saudi, which was actually the privatisation of Saudi Telecom. So I started working on the privatisation, which was taking the government post and telecommunications and privatising it. PwC managed that whole process, and I joined that. Project. Didn't know anything about telecommunications. I can remember my first day, I was talking to a guy and he was talking about exchanges and stuff, and I had no idea what he was talking about. My knowledge of telecommunications was absolutely basic, but that's how I started in telecommunications, worked on that for 2 years, and then I joined PwC London and I was with PwC London after that for many years. And that's where I was part of PwC London's telco strategy team. Ultimately, it became the telco strategy team. Worked for them for many years, but felt called back to South Africa. Did a bit of a career break when my first son was born. Just when he was born, we packed up and we moved back to South Africa. 2 years of doing a bit more studying, and also did some charity work for a couple of years before PwC asked me to come back to the Middle East again, if I would be willing to come back. And I came back to Saudi Arabia again working on a project at Saudi Telecom for them. And after that, I joined PwC South Africa. So 2 years. Then I was another 2 years with a young family back in Saudi. By this stage, my second son was born. I was still very much focused on telecommunications, but when I moved back to South Africa, I realized the market is just not, the telecommunications market is much smaller. In the UK, I was used to, my client base was all of Europe. It was all the way down to New Zealand. It was the Caribbean. So there were many telecommunication companies to work on. There was a large volume that we worked on. When I moved back to South Africa, limited opportunities for telecommunication companies, and therefore I expanded then, and I became more looking at infrastructure and asset management, and those were the areas I started focusing on across industries. And then I moved. Then the one thing I have to say, during all that time, I was still very much connected with the Middle Eastern firm. I kept on supporting our Middle Eastern firm. I kept on supporting them on projects. Although Saudi Arabia 25 years ago was a completely different place to live in, and it was hard sometimes, it is really a place that I learned to love, and the people I love, and I always felt a drawback to Saudi. And then about 2016, I was still doing projects here, but then Vision 2030 in Saudi was announced, and I saw that there was an opportunity there, that there's going to be massive transformation coming. And I then had a discussion with our advisory leader in the Middle East at that time to say, listen, I'm supporting you. I can see what is coming. I would really want to be part of this transformation. And then I was already a partner. I became partner in South Africa. I became a partner, PwC partner in South Africa. I was a partner leading asset management business. And I made the exciting move to move the family back to Saudi in start of 2017. We all joined, and since then I've been focused on the Middle East and the Middle East market. Most of it is in Saudi Arabia because of the nature of what's happening here. And I'm a partner, as you said, leading asset lifecycle management evaluation. We kind of changed that name slightly. It's now asset and facility management, because asset and facility management is being used interchangeably. Yeah. So sorry, it was not very quick, but in a nutshell, that is my career over the last 30 years. Yeah, it's 30 years now.
Well, it's quite the jump from a rural farm in South Africa to a city that you've never been to, all the way straight to Saudi Arabia when you were quite young. Why did you? Two questions. Why did you choose to do accounting? Because many students, it's well known to be less exciting as an occupation. And also, why did you jump for the opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia? Some others may have been a bit more timid, or have said, no, South Africa is a very comfortable place to work at.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, when I was growing up in South Africa, and I don't know if it's changed, there were a few careers in front of somebody. You can become an engineer, you can become a doctor, you can become a lawyer, a teacher, and an accountant. And there was always this aura around the chartered accountant. If somebody becomes a chartered accountant, they are well made. So there was this kind of aura around chartered accountants, and an actuary. So you had actuaries and chartered accountants. When I was at school, there was this kind of aura around a chartered accountant. And interesting, I think in a place, I'm stand to be corrected, but in a place like South Africa, even today, something like 70% of CEOs are chartered accountants, and 90% of CFOs will be chartered accountants. So it was a route in South Africa where, if you were serious about the corporate career, a lot of people would follow becoming a chartered accountant. So I I was lucky enough. My dad's a farmer. He was a farmer at heart, but my dad was actually my school principal as well. He was my high school principal. So he could see what my gifts were, and he would. Although my brother and my sisters all went into different directions, they all became teachers first. He always encouraged me to look at accounting, and that's why I went into accounting. Saying that, whilst I was studying, I didn't think I made the right decision. Every year I thought, no, I should not be studying accounting. I don't like this. I should become something else. Something that's more creative. Whilst I was studying, but of course, the moment I qualified, the ability that gave you in the business, well, firstly, to be employed by a company like PwC, which I didn't even realize at that time, how few people would get into a place like PwC, and just your employability was just so great at that time. It was above everything else. So I chose it because of money, I suppose. That because I looked at the careers where you can make money, and that's never good. I would never advise anyone to make that decision today, but that is kind of what I did. And at the end of the day, I worked, and then you asked the question, why did I jump to come here? Because even being an auditor, because in South Africa you all start in auditing. At those days, you can only start in auditing. Now they've changed it. You can work in banking, you can work in the industry, in finance, and you can still become a chartered accountant. I didn't like auditing. It just wasn't for me. There's a place for it. It's critical and it's very important. But for me, so when something like Saudi, and I'm a traveler at heart. I love traveling. I even then I've only been to a few countries, but I just wanted to experience something new, and that's why I jumped at it. More where it was, and that was out of South Africa. That was the reason more than what I was going to do. But in hindsight, maybe our God planned it, and then the day it was that 2 years in Saudi really shaped the rest of my career. That was really the foundation. Linking with UK, moving to the UK firm, which is just a different experience. The level at which PwC in the UK operate, that taught me just in those 7 years that I was there, it's just a different level of how they operate, and I'm very grateful about that time. So that just pushed me in that direction.
What is different about PwC South Africa and PwC UK?
I mean, I've done work as you said earlier, in 27 countries. I've worked for 3 different, because the model of PwC is we're actually individual firms. We are member firms, but every country or every region is a firm by itself, standalone partners running that firm. So of course the culture is quite different in different places, but the step up in the level at which you had to operate when I went from PwC South Africa to PwC London or UK, I couldn't describe it. I mean, I would sometimes find myself sitting in the toilet thinking, how in the world will I be able to, even despite the language? I mean, for me, I was still very much an Afrikaans guy. So now to work in a firm where people correcting when I say, me and my brother, and I know it's my brother, and so I got corrected the whole, so I was being corrected in my language the whole time, and I enjoyed that. But the relationships in Saudi and the Middle East are different. You build relationships in a different way. It's not like Europe where the trust comes from how good you are and how good your advice is. Here, the trust, yes, a large element is that, but a large element is how much they can trust you as a person and having that connectivity. So the questions are just different. But the UK would put you in a position, long hours, by far the longest hours than anywhere else that I've ever worked, every day until 11. It was just long days, long hours, but it was fun. I loved the people. I have great friends at PwC UK, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of hard work.
And you mentioned that you've got clients across Europe when you're in PwC UK. Did you work with those clients and travel throughout?
Yeah. So to be honest, in my 7 years in the UK, I think I did, maybe 3 projects in the UK. The rest were in Europe, New Zealand, Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Dubai. I went as far as the Bahamas for projects. So I've worked with the European telecommunication companies mostly. France, Orange, which used to be called Orange, France Telecom, and all their subsidiaries across Europe, Switzerland, Slovakia, in Germany, in Romania, Turkey, so all the way to Turkey. So that was my client base, was really European telecommunication companies, and then even as far as I said, New Zealand and other places as well.
Well, I want to ask a bit more about your work in PwC Middle East. However, before we discuss it, I think it's important for the audience who might not know the kingdom too well. What is Vision 2030 and why was it necessary?
Yeah, I mean, Vision 2030, I mean, Saudi Arabia, again, I lived here the first time was in 1999 when I lived in Saudi Arabia. It was an extremely interesting place. And again, it was, the dynamics were quite pronounced at that time, because it was just before 9/11, and of course when 9/11 happened, it cast a lot of focus on Saudi and maybe Saudi's role in that. So politically, which I was oblivious to about what the political ramifications would be. It was purely it was a country that pumped oil out of the ground, sold oil, but the society was very much just inward looking, just very much focused on themselves, and they're being very religious and being focused on the religion and as the keepers of the Muslim faith, and everything was designed around the religion and what the religion would require. And that was how the country operated. Just inward looking, we would get oil money and we would use that on us, for us. Again, I'm not privy, or I'm not an expert on the complexities of the royal family and how the royal family operates, but when the current King Salman, when he became king, he's already, and I don't know if you know, or all the kings until now, they were all the sons of the original king of Saudi Arabia. So they were all the sons. So the crown would pass from one brother to the next brother. So it would only, and the succession was only to brothers. And King Salman was effectively at the end of this line, and he had one more brother, which was the crown prince at that time. But as I understand it, there were quite different views within the royal family of the future of Saudi Arabia. And when King Salman made his son, Mohammed bin Salman, he made him crown prince at the early age of 30s. That was a big upheaval politically in Saudi Arabia. But with that, and as I understand it, that is really that was the catalyst for transformation in Saudi Arabia, and that is where Vision 2030 was born. They looked at this and they realized that the kingdom needs to transform. They can't rely on a single source of revenue, which is oil. They can't rely on that. They can't continue being very much inwardly focused and enforcing a certain way of life. If they want to be more of a global citizen, they can't allow the kingdom to continue as they are. If they want to be a global trade partner, and then Vision 2030 was born, which was very much just to say, okay, it is to look at a few different elements, but it was, how do we transform the economy in Saudi Arabia to not be focused on one revenue stream, to be well established globally as one of the strongest economies, not be reliant on oil, as I say, but also to transform the society in a way that still aligns to the values that the country have always had, but also makes them show the world that they are actually a partner that people want to trade with and interact with as well. And that was where Vision 30 comes from. It was very ambitious, and it is still very ambitious, and maybe when they set out in 2016, whether they will achieve everything they set out by 2030, that was set out, I don't think everything will be achieved, but large elements of that, I believe, it's clear. I mean, large elements of that have already been achieved, really, within the kingdom.
And what are some examples of that which has been achieved so far?
I mean, there are a few things. So there's national alignment. That is to align the economy of Saudi Arabia, to align it with the global economy, and to align it with the demand within global economy. So there's aligning what the kingdom has, oil on the one hand, but the kingdom also has some amazing tourist opportunities. So there's national alignment and changing the strategy in that area. A big thing they have achieved, or they've gone a long way in achieving, is governance and accountability. 10 years ago, everything in Saudi Arabia, almost everything in Saudi Arabia, was owned and managed by government. So it was owned and managed by government. So roads, government, airports, ports, everything is government owned. There are a few family businesses around that will retail and things like that, but anything else was just government owned. And we all know that government, especially not mature governments. Now in Europe it's different maybe, but governments aren't that great at efficiencies, optimization. They have a lot of fat in them, and they also don't have a mindset of accountability. So accountability was the big thing. So what they have achieved, they introduced something simple, which is accrual accounting. Now, it's a simple accounting term, but the government was cash accounting. So you would get a budget of X billion Saudi riyals, and at the end of the year you had to spend that X billion, and there were no questions asked on how you spent it. So it's a cash economy. You get cash, you spend the cash, and nobody cares about it. They've implemented accrual accounting for all government entities. And what that means is it's proper, like IFRS reporting. It's IPSAS is the reporting standard for public sector, but just that reporting standard brought a level of firstly accountability, because you now have to report. You have to report on these standards back to central government, but very much a governance structure that was implemented. Another big thing that was achieved is privatization. A big drive of Vision 2030 was to privatize a lot of government services. Now they have a fair bit to go on that, but I don't know if you know Public Investment Fund. We just call it PIF. PIF is the sovereign fund of Saudi Arabia. It's the sovereign fund that they own. They own a lot. They own most of the large state-owned entities. PIF have taken over the ownership of those. They own the likes of Aramco, the oil producer. They're big shareholder in Aramco, in SABIC, the petrochemical. They own Newcastle Football Club. They own Uber. They own many things around the world. So they've diversified. And then that's part of diversification of revenue. So PIF was set up. PIF came in, brought in governance, brought in ownership, not just funding being handed over to entities to just. In all circumstances, you will get a waste. There was a lot of wastage in Saudi Arabia. A lot of money just being wasted on unnecessary projects. So by bringing in that governance and that accountability, that they really have achieved. And to a large extent, they've also achieved changing the economy to more of a commercial model, than purely just the oil-based economy. So those are the key things. I mean, some things they are stepping back on, like the NEOM project. Those kind of projects, they are stepping back. They've looked at it, and although most people would have always looked at the ambitions, thinking, is this really achievable? They've come in and said, okay, well, there's some expenditure that on those kind of giga projects, which maybe does not really. It's nice as a ad for Saudi Arabia, but it's actually not really achieving the benefits of 2030, and therefore they've reined in some of those giga projects.
So how does your work come into the Vision 2030? Have you worked on some of these projects as the asset management and, well, no longer valuation, but the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, we still do valuation. I mean, our work is driven by this transformation because there are two sides. There's two sides to it. There's a massive spend on infrastructure, and that is what I saw. So the moment the government will spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on infrastructure, there is a lot of work to help them to set up these infrastructure projects, to manage these infrastructure projects, to help them optimize, to help them just report on what they have, and just as something as simple as asset data and an understanding of the assets that they own. A big problem in Saudi Arabia and the government, any government that makes this transformation, they didn't know what assets they even had. They had no idea what assets they had. They had no idea what the value of those assets are. So it's taken 7-8 years to just build that picture, and that's where consultants were important, is to help the government in creating a government opening balance sheet and creating an opening asset register for simpler word, for the lack of a simpler word, just to create the opening asset register for them to understand what is in their hands and what assets do they own. So that was a big part of what we've done and what we are still doing. We're moving into the phase of optimization and getting efficiencies now out of the assets, but some of these projects are still being operationalized. So until now, a lot of these giga projects were just ideas at one stage. They're in the construction phase, so there's a lot of management of costs and a lot of management of effort within that. Now, as they become operationalized, how do you run these assets? How do you manage these assets? From a valuation perspective, valuation comes in different parts. Firstly, in creating the opening registers for the government in all sectors. Now, you must remember when I say opening registers, it's everything. It is every road that you drive on, every part of a city, every port, every airport you come through, every hospital you go to, every school you go to. Then, as PIF takes ownership of a lot of these government assets get transferred to the sovereign fund. So when they get transferred, again, there's valuation, for instance. Now there's a different principle of at which to value these assets. For government, the valuation would happen based on the principle of the value, the replacement cost of the asset, but also what the value to society would be for those assets. If that is now transferred into a corporate environment where it's for profit, there are different valuation considerations, and hence valuation stays very much. So although it's valuation, what our job is, a lot of our work is asset transfers. So we do the whole asset transfer from one government entity to another, from government to private sector. To do those transfers, it's because there's legal elements. How do you carve out these assets? Some of these assets sits on land that are owned by individuals and they're owned by other people. So it's complex solutions to transfer these assets from one entity to another. Some of these transfers can take years to get the legal aspect, the people aspect, to get the actual view of the assets. So a lot of the consulting work is around those asset transfers between government and entities. And then the exciting part is then how to manage these assets. That's now where we're going into using technology, technology-enabled solutions of monitoring the performance of these assets, monitoring the efficiency and the optimization of these assets.
So you work from the full life cycle, from its government body all the way to becoming a private sector firm.
Yeah, so we have so some is just government clients. they have one. They have one. They have a different requirement of their assets. Then there is the transfer between these entities, and then it sits with a more mature entity, the corporate entity. Then the asset management and facility management work we do there, that is a different requirement then. So it's sitting across all of that. And sometimes we follow the same asset all the way from when it came into the government, where we created in the government, and we would follow it all as it being transferred, and then we would help the ultimate corporate client who's actually managing that asset at the end of the day as well.
So you've advised both government and private sector organizations. What lessons do you think that they have to learn, so the private sector can learn from the government, and then the government can learn from the private sector?
And again, that question is a unique question in Saudi Arabia, or in the region actually, because although I'm saying there's this big privatization drive, ultimately all assets are to some extent still owned by government, or the majority of the assets, because it started off as government-owned assets, just kind of sitting in a big black box. Then it moved into departments that have been created, and the asset ownership would be within these ministries or departments. Even if those assets shift to the sovereign funds like PIF is still ultimately owned by the Saudi government. So it's still a government-owned entity. PIF is then within PIF there are portfolio companies. The portfolio companies are in every sector that you can think of: water, electricity, telecommunications, space, everything you can think of. That's where PIF, and then that's where the corporatization starts. So the only entities that are truly private entities in a place like Saudi Arabia are your family-owned businesses, and they are quite unique by themselves, and some of them are very big groups. You have Al Futtaim, and you have these big groups. They own, especially in retail and manufacturing. So you have these tiers of government, semi-government, or government-owned entities, but they are run like corporates. So you can call them corporates basically, and they have been transforming into corporates. So that's a big part of target work for us, is helping those corporates to become fully mature corporates, not just because they've moved from the mentality of government into a corporate mentality. So the lessons, I'll come back to my earlier point. Saudi is a unique place. In a place like in Europe, if you want to run a corporate, you would have a big pool of CEOs and CFOs and people who've run corporates all over the world, and you can select from them to come and run your corporate. Here, everyone had to make the shift from a government mentality into a very much a corporate mentality. And some people have made it very quickly and very well. And the lessons really learn is to grasp I think the biggest, we always say when we do projects in Saudi Arabia especially, stakeholder management is by far the biggest thing, is to get every stakeholder in an organization aligned with the outcomes that needs to be achieved. And that's why I say business in this part of the world is relationship, and it's give and take. It's almost like a dance. It's you have a goal in mind, you're going to get there, but you're not going to go in a straight line there. You have to get everyone lined up, and you have to take them with you, and maybe you have to take a longer way to get there at the end of the day. The lessons are that you should find a way of shortening that, because that route can become quite expensive if you continuously do that. That is really what the government type organizations can learn if they really want to transform, that they really need to make that change quicker. I think that is the biggest thing, that from that perspective. Corporate is just, for them, it's a shock sometimes, because suddenly, Saudi is a heavily subsidized environment. Electricity subsidized, water subsidized, everything is subsidized. Now, as you go into the more mature environment, those subsidies are not there anymore. To how to start running these organizations, so corporates need to learn how to become profitable and how to be optimized, how to be very profitable, because the subsidies are not going to be there for always, and some of them have disappeared actually already.
I'd love to go back to Vision 2030. Before the interview, we discussed throughout the world, you've got examples of countries announcing projects. And in the UK, we have HS2, which was very difficult to execute. And now you've got Saudi, who have Vision 2030, which is even more ambitious than most other strategies. From your experience, what has made Saudi more successful than other countries in executing Vision 2030?
In Saudi Arabia, they've got the money, that's firstly. So oil revenue is there. So oil revenue is there. Because it's run by a royal family, they don't need permission to do anything. They don't necessarily need approval ratings to announce anything. And if somebody is not happy with what they announce, it's okay. You cannot be unhappy. You can be unhappy, but it's not necessarily that will change anybody's minds. Almost everything here is done on a royal decree. So if there is a royal decree, it has to happen. If there's a royal decree that these companies need to move from here to there, it just has to happen. There's no ifs or buts about it. Everyone, they need to go and find the budget, and it just needs to happen. So because of the royal decrees, it makes life simpler from a decision and from an initiation perspective, at least.
You've spent a significant part of your career working with telecoms organizations.
Yeah.
Looking back over the past 2 decades, how has the industry changed over the past 20 years?
I mean, telecommunication is an interesting sector, because I can remember when I started in this, even it was literally just phone calls. Telecommunication companies were phone calls. There was mobile phones were there, landlines were there, mobile phones were there. Internet was effectively also over the same copper cables, and there was a machine at the one side interpreting the pings on a copper cable and converting it into digital elements. But it was effectively just selling those copper cables and what you can do over those copper cables, selling that and selling the minutes and selling everything. Even when text messaging came out, I can remember text messaging when that came out. Initially, some telcos just gave it away for free, and then they realized everyone is just texting now and they're not talking to one another, and then they started making a chargeable service, and at one stage in the early 2000s, more revenue was generated through 2p text messages than phone calls, for instance. And then of course the big transformation came when internet came. Even when I was consulting, I can remember that some telcos would say that nobody would ever make a call over data. They would still make a call over the line. Phone call, it won't be a data call. Now, the thing with telecommunications, even if you take the telecommunication equipment can have a life of 15 years. But to be honest, very few telecommunication equipment actually last more than 3-4 years because of the technology change. It's not because of the equipment, it's the technology change. It's just there is something that replaces this. So in the last 10 years, I think has been a much bigger shift, and telecommunication companies are now moving away. Voice and data, even data, these are commodities. They are commodities that, you're going to pay for EE and for Vodafone. There's going to be very little difference in what you pay per minute or per megabit or whatever the charge is. It's just a commodity. Telcos are now looking at this, and they are diversifying. Well, a few years ago, they started diversifying into banking, financial services. So they moved into financial services because they realized they have the network to move money around the world and a country and create digital wallets and things like that. and they moved into banking. Now the big move is to actually becoming to expanding their services. Telcos are becoming software companies. They're becoming software implementers. They're becoming AI data centers. They're moving into the world of data centers. They are becoming something quite different. They're becoming, as I said, they will become more software defined. So what they can do, what services they can provide, but they themselves being a provider of services in the digital space, in the software implementation space, being a cloud, a data center, and that's where the Middle East, just for interest's sake, in AI, the Middle East, the adoption in the Middle East is much greater, because here in the Middle East, they can build data centers. Energy and power is not an issue in the Middle East. There's no issue of energy. Europe and those places, America, the limitation on big data centers and AI expansion is around energy. It's where do we get the energy from to actually run these things? Here in the Middle East, they are cashing in on that, for instance. And the telcos are doing this and say, we have no shortage of energy. Our focus is on AI. Of course, satellite is also impacting, because even the commoditized element of this data and phone call and telephone, if Starlink, if they have a low orbit satellite that can cover that, why do I need a mobile phone if I can do calls over Starlink network? So they become partners with low orbit satellite providers, especially. It's always been the more traditional satellite. So they're stepping into that low orbit, and they're even thinking of building that. So they do a conversion of those networks, satellite and terrestrial services. They are moving into enterprise technology, developing specific solutions for specific industries. They're becoming a software company almost more than what they are infrastructure provider for telecommunication networks. Space is an interesting thing because, it used to be a big selling point for telcos, their coverage, where they cover. Now they can cover every part of the world, every ocean of the world. They can give you, because of the Starlink network, for instance, your Vodafone can give you a reception in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, if they really want to, if they have the right agreements in place. So your customer, the connectivity it's going to become a given for your generation. It's going to be a given to always be connected, and it's seamless connection. It's not the case of, oh, do I have a roaming agreement in South Africa, or do I have a roaming agreement in France? Can I travel to France? These things will just become seamless connections. And the telcos know that they need to be part of that. They can't just leave that for other operators to operate in.
Can you see many telcos going out of business, and there being one or two who have been able to build a network, satellite network?
I don't think they will. I don't think that. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they will go in trying to build their own networks. They will partner with the firms who are doing this and who are leading it. They will partner with it. Telcos don't really go out of business. What does happen is they get absorbed by, or they merge with another telco. Now, over the years, they would merge with other telcos. I can see a world where maybe they merge with technology firms, not with the Googles and the Amazons and people like that of the world, where they become part of those companies. But I don't think they will ever go bust. They've built networks, and they are connecting people, despite it being a commodity. They are still connecting people, and it will always be needed.
Thank you. I'd love to move on to your advice and some questions that students who would be interested into working in consulting in the future might have. So you've interviewed many candidates and graduates throughout your career.
Yeah.
What separates the candidates who go on to become exceptional consultants from those who don't?
I can, of course, I can speak for the kind of work that I do. The profile of a consultant that in my profile and the profile of consultants that work for firms like or for solutions like mine, but most kind of solutions. It's the profile of the person that I look at firstly. So, and I mean, the big thing these days is AI. So everyone is scared that their jobs will be taken by AI. I think there's a reality in that, but the people, the analytical thinkers, the people with a profile for analytical thinking, for problem solving, they will always remain. They will always remain very valuable in a consulting environment. So what I'm looking at these days may be quite different to what I looked at even 5 years ago. 5 years ago, a kind of a general experience and what they've done in the past. Do they have experience? Are they engineers? So the people I employ are either finance or engineering background people or technology background people. Now, in the past, you would look at the experience and what they've qualified as. These days, to be honest, we look at the qualifications because it gives you some idea of what somebody's background would be. But we really look at what they're passionate about. And this is my advice for anyone would be: don't go and try to find a job if you don't think you can be passionate about the topic, because it will come out. It will come out if you're just doing it for the sake of doing a job. But okay, it's different. It's different if you interviewed for flipping burgers in McDonald's. Of course, I mean, I don't think anybody would be passionate about that. But if it is going into a strategy consulting world, being passionate about what does that mean? What are the things that you can bring? The advice I would give anyone is, you need to be able to show that you, if you're not already, but you have the ability to utilize technology. And I don't want to just call it AI, but you are very much technology minded in how you solve problems, because that is what people are looking at. But much more importantly, it's that analytical, strategic minded person and we test it in certain ways and asking certain questions. But what remains extremely important is the human connection, the way that somebody interacts, whether they can interact, whether they can look you in the eye, whether they can hold a conversation, and whether they can and they actually have a compassion for the person that sits in front of them. That human connection for me is very important. It's extremely important. Then comes the technical abilities. Then come the so don't underestimate the human connection you can make in interviews and any kind of interaction with somebody. That first impression when you meet someone, the first thing that you talk about, that is much more important than trying to convince somebody that you have experience in a certain area or you are brilliant in a different area.
How can someone demonstrate that they have problem-solving characteristics if they are applying? Is it maybe an entrepreneurial background? You mentioned AI native might be the term that we use here at university. Being in the AI community, that kind of thing. What do you look for?
I mean, of course, we have tests. So anybody applying for us would do psychometric tests, and it would rank you in 3 areas. There's a verbal area, and there you can be excused if English is not your first language and things like that. But then there's an analytical. All the questions are geared towards analytical minded. How do you solve problems? I mean, I will ask questions for people. I would paint a scenario and saying, okay, you are a client, you come up with a problem, you sit in front of a client, they ask you a question about something that you've never come across. You've never come across that kind of problem. It's not an area of your expertise. How would you solve this for the client? Now, the people who are not analytically minded, they would start to waffle and think. Some people might say, "Okay, I will go back. I will sit down. I will consider what he's asking. I will maybe ask a few more questions. I will. These days, AI. I would go on. I would go and do my research around this. I will look at what I would put out. I normally listen out for the steps. How will I go and solve this problem? I don't ask the person to solve the problem, but just the logical steps of how would I do it analytically. How would I go through this flow? Now, there's an exception to that process. You have a genius sometimes who just knows the answer. They don't have to go through that process. And of course, they are different. But most analytically minded people can demonstrate that process they will go through to solve a problem. And that's relatively the same. Doesn't matter whether the problem is a mathematical problem or whether the problem is a human problem or a staff problem. It's normally the process is normally very similar.
Well, what makes someone stand out at PwC once they're hired and they're working there for a few years?
Yeah, I mean, the key part of your question is once they've been there for a few years, there are people who stand out very quickly because of one of two things, because of the way that they put themselves forward. So some people force themselves to the forefront. So they will know everyone. They would be able to network, and everyone knows them. But at some point they might get found out that there's very little substance behind them. So the people that stand out are firstly the people that have a very good understanding of the culture in which they operate. So somebody that stands out in PwC is somebody who's found a way of having extremely happy clients and having a client that's always happy with the services and still delivering high quality work, still being able to do that. That is somebody that for me, so the moment I see a manager or senior manager that they are able, their clients are always happy with them. They always, the outcomes of their projects are always of the highest quality. That makes someone stand out. And then somebody that can take the nuances of a culture like a Middle Eastern culture and not force their worldly views onto that culture, but is willing to work with that culture, because the majority of people in my profession in Saudi Arabia are not from Saudi. They might be from other parts of the Middle East or from the Levant, from Jordan and places like that, but not many are from Saudi. So people need to be able to show that appreciation of the culture that you're operating in, and still delivering the high quality. I think that is really what stands out for me.
Many students are concerned that AI will replace graduate jobs. How do you think AI will end up changing consulting? And what skills, I mean, you've mentioned earlier, problem solving and communication. Those are the two key ones that you look for.
Yeah.
But what skills are kind of very important?
The truthful answer is that any person in my role, the truth is that we are looking at our workforce, and we know our workforce is not going to look the same than what it looked like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The pyramid that we have so we always kind of work in pyramids. We say one partner, there's many directors, senior managers, consultants, senior consultants. So there's a kind of a pyramid. Everything that we can see is that will change, and that pyramid will become more of a diamond. In our industry, it will become, you will need that middle layer, and that middle layer will remain the same, of people who are able to manage and people who are who's got the experience and who are able to think. You're always going to need them, and that layer will be there. But the doers, in the past, everyone in those top layers came through as doers from the bottom. That layer is going to be much smaller, and that's, unfortunately, that is the graduate layer. That's the layer that was always fed by graduates, people coming out of university. But that doesn't mean that if you have the right profile and the right background, you will most likely be as likely of getting a job in the consulting or the professional services world than what you would have had before. And the question is, what is that right profile, and what is that right? I don't think people should be concerned. I mean, I'm not going to go. I listened to Elon Musk again a couple of days ago, where he's quite firm and just saying, why do you worry? Nobody will have to work in the future. Everyone will just take the benefit of AI, and we will just live in this utopian world of what's the movie, Wall-E, where the people are just floating around on the chairs and being fed. I mean that's the kind of world. Why worry whether you will have a job or not? Because you wouldn't need a job. I don't think that is the case. But I think we're also in an untested time. Personally, I think students will have to be more careful about what they go and study, because just studying something for the sake, well, maybe not what they study, is what they, and the UK is different again. I mean, this is the respect I have for the UK system, is you can study history and you can go and work in banking a month later. You can study geography and you can work for PwC, and you can finish your geography degree in May and September. You can start at PwC. Your qualifications don't always define what you're able to do, but there will be a lot of opportunities. I think entrepreneurs will always be there, because you need the people who have ideas. But where do people then get experience? The easy answer was always look at the technology firms. But even the technology firms, I mean, the other day, I think I read somewhere that OpenAI or somebody, they employ a fifth of the amount of programmers they used to employ a few years ago, just because they don't need all those programmers anymore. AI has taken over that. So my thing would be, of course, if you have a trade, I would say to somebody, don't be scared of taking on a trade first, doing something. You can always need a trade. Even if you want to be a consultant, that experience of what you get out of a trade can help you in that. But if I have to give advice to anyone, I say, make sure you use the word AI native. Although AI has got its dangers, and I wouldn't want to rely on AI for my life. If we are not able to utilize it, and if you're not able to even talk about it, and you're not able to demonstrate that you use it on a regular basis for good things, for projects, and not just for Google or for helping write an essay or something like that, that is what people increasingly would look for more and more, that you know how to go and solve a problem by utilizing AI. But I'm not committing to what it will look like, because I think we're in a stage now where we don't actually know what are the critical skills that new graduates will have to show in order to get a job. But I can see a reality where it can become difficult for a while to actually find a job because of people in the corporate world thinking that AI should be able to do anything. But I think people also very quickly realize that there are many things that AI can't do. And we now at that stage where people might adjust their recruitment because they think AI can do much more than what it actually can.
Well, across your career, you've worked with, I can imagine, leaders, senior leaders, executives of companies across the Middle East and throughout the world. Are there certain characteristics that you see consistently make those leaders successful who you've worked with?
On balance, the most successful ones are the ones who they don't need to be recognized necessarily as a leader. They lead not with the purpose of being recognized as the leader, if I can put it that way. They lead in a way where they are enabling people to make decisions for themselves, and people are not scared of making mistakes because they know they have a safety net from their leader. You have I can see it in corporates quite often. If you have a leader who has a big stick in his hand, and the moment somebody makes a mistake, they firstly expose that person for the mistake, and then secondly they go after those organizations are dysfunctional. But the ones where the leader stands up and take responsibility and say, if this person made a mistake, it's not my mistake, but I will take the responsibility for the outcome of the mistake, and not to how he deals with the person. There can still be an element of how do you deal with the person. But the leaders that I've seen are really the ones who are really successful are the ones who can recognize in their organizations the people who are able to read people, the ones who are able to read people and say, I can read a person and I can know. There are some people that are just great at that. They spend 2 minutes with someone and they have an idea of what this person's capabilities are. They have an idea of the potential risks with that person, and they are able to manage those people in that way. So it's somebody who cannot understand people and communicate. They struggle to be effective leaders. But when it comes to creating a culture and organization that there's room for making mistakes, and that your leadership will protect you when mistakes happen, those cultures I can see are the most effective places, because then everyone respects a leader so much that they would be willing to go beyond just what is being asked of them. It becomes all. It's not just an organization. It almost becomes like a living organism where people know that they have a role to play in this body, and if they don't function, it impacts the whole body. But it's really leaders who are able to give, and I believe it comes from a place where you give people the opportunity to make decisions themselves, to grow, to come up with ideas, but you still give them the safety net that if they make a mistake, that nobody will come down on them with the force of nature if they do make mistakes in doing that.
You said earlier that in Saudi, having that connection with your client is much more important. How are you able to build a connection with your clients when you don't speak Arabic and they might have, how do you build that connection?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do feel I'm a little bit sad that I was not able to learn Arabic to the extent that I could have learned Arabic based on the time I've spent here, because that does actually increase the connectivity with people much, much more. However, Saudi is not the same. I mean, a place like France or Spain, for instance, I think if you go and live in France and Spain, for them as a culture, it's very important that you speak French and that you speak Spanish. Saudi is not that. They are proud and they love it when somebody would speak Arabic, but there's no expectation of me to speak Arabic. There's no expectation to accept me only if I speak Arabic, or to accept me as a friend. Saudis are extremely hospitable. They are very hospitable. You would walk in the street, you would meet a guy, you'd start chatting. An hour later, you would be in his house having coffee and dates and chatting and being invited for the wedding, for his son's wedding in 2 days' time. So it's they are very hospitable. So that human connection and language would be great if you can speak the language, but even beyond language, you are able to make those connections.
And they speak English to you?
Yeah, and then to answer that question, yeah, that's the reason I didn't have to really learn Arabic is because in the corporate world, it's you can get away with English, and they speak very good English. A lot of the in Saudi had a big program of sending people to study in the UK or the US. So a lot of the people now at that executive level, and even below that, everyone just speaks English because the culture is the more to speak English. But my generation and slightly younger, most of them studied in the US or in the UK, and they've learned business in English basically. So that's why it's easy to do my work in English.
My final question is, if you could sit down with your 20-year-old self, you've just graduated from the University of Joburg, what advice would you give him?
What advice would I give him? I mean, I would have to think very carefully about that, because I would not want to give him any advice that would change any of his decisions.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I would. I mean, when I look back at my life, okay, of course, I've made wrong decisions and I've made mistakes in my life as well. But the outcome of my life, I feel very blessed with the outcome of my life, and from a family perspective, from my wife and children, from my work. And if I were to give my 20-year-old or 21-year-old self any advice, I would think I can risk him not making some of those mistakes, and then maybe even changing the course of many different things. The one thing I would give is you don't realize how quickly life moves on, and for me it became 2 years ago. My father passed away, and when my father passed away, I suddenly had this kind of crisis in my head, because I thought, okay, you know what? When my dad was as old as I'm now, I can remember it like yesterday. Like, then suddenly in my head, I had this whole thing about, oh no, that means that I'm only this many years from the age at which my dad passed away, 83, and then I realized actually how short life really is. So I think the advice I would give is, don't change any major decisions necessarily, but make sure that your focus is on the right things, and make sure that your priorities are the right things. Now, I think to some extent I've managed to live my life like that, but there are still areas where I get stressed because of work pressure, and I think, because of work pressure, your mind starts, and then you get anxious and stressed because you think, I haven't done a good enough job, or even go as far as you might lose your job and things like. And that's not really necessarily at all, because if your priorities are right, if you look at the things that God has given you from a family perspective, from a personal life, from the blessings that you have, all these other things are just secondary. I mean, I've always had the philosophy, when somebody asks me, am I successful? And I can honestly say I've never measured my career as success. Even though I can say that I'm successful, but my career was never that I measured myself in as successful. For me, success is wife, 3 beautiful sons. That's success. And and the lives that they live and the character that they have, those are the successful things in my life. So I would maybe tell myself to make sure that I invest my time into building the character, even more building the character of my children, more than worrying about the character of my career or anything like that. Those would be the only things I would really change, maybe. Or the advice I would give myself, not hoping not to change much.
Thank you. That was a very thoughtful answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I appreciate this interview and the advice you've given, the lessons you've shared. I'm sure it's going to be of very valuable to many students here at Durham University and audience throughout the world, which I'm privileged to have now. So thank you so much, Neels.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you so much.